So we have the new Arks of Omen Grand Tournament Pack, but how is this going to affect Necrons in the new season of 40k? It's coming right up.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, let's talk Necrons in the new season of Warhammer 40k. There's been a lot of changes in the new Arks of Omen Tournament Pack, especially affecting our Necrons. We're going to talk about them today. We're going to talk about how we're going to cope and maybe what lists we might see going forward. The mechanics of most of the pre-game stuff hasn't changed at all, things like deployment and rolling to see who goes first. However, building our lists has changed a lot, and that's down to the new Arks of Omen detachment. This new detachment is a large detachment. It also costs 0 CPs, which is quite interesting. List building is going to be very easy to take pretty much what you want going forward. You even have Lords of War in this detachment. And the good thing about that means that our Lords of War, like the Monolith, is going to get the Dynasty Code. Now you still have to pay 1 CP for your Relic and also for your Warlord trait. There's also a new stratagem for, well, mainly our Catans. You can only have 1 Catan in a detachment normally, but for 1 CP you can take an additional 1. That doesn't mean you can take 2 Nightbringers, but it does mean you can take, say, a Nightbringer and a Void Dragon in the same detachment. Previously you had to have different detachments to do that. Some armies can take additional detachments with the Battle Brother rules. However, Necrons don't have this. That means no additional detachment, so a maximum of 2 Catans. The triple Catan list is out. It also has a massive impact on the Silent King, because the Silent King, whilst it is a dynastic agent, he can't be in a dynasty that isn't his own in 1 detachment. So effectively you can only take the Silent King if it's Zerican dynasty. Well, unless this is an oversight from GW and it gets FAQ'd. Now they've changed the way reserves work as well. You no longer have to pay CPs to put units into reserve that don't have the ability on their data slate to do it for free. Necrons have a lot of units which can do it for free. However, this is still going to help us with things like the Night Scythe Bomb. The missions themselves haven't really changed. They have been tweaked very slightly, but they're almost the same. However, we've had the new data slate out, and that's had a massive impact on our most popular dynasty, the Objective Secure and Pre-Game Move dynasty. That's not there no more. Well, you can still take the custom Objective Secure dynasty, but you can't take another benefit with it, so just Objective Secure, which you might as well just take Nihilic if you're going to do that, because of course they have Objective Secure, plus they have some extra bonuses, and then you unlock the Nihilic stratagem and Warlord trait and even Relic. Now of course you can take pre-game moves still and maybe put that with something else, like maybe Rad Wreath. That is an option. The primary objectives in the missions haven't changed at all, so of course that does make Objective Secure very powerful, very useful, and almost needed. I do foresee with this new detachment and with some other things we're going to talk about later in this video that we will be seeing troops on the table for Necrons anyway. And if you're playing troops, then you could say, well, you don't really need Objective Secure. However, of course, if you have Objective Secure and you're playing troops, you get double Objective Secure. So if you have 3 warriors on an objective, that counts as 6. That's going to make it very difficult for your opponent to take objectives from your units. Okay, so let's talk about the biggest changes in this book, and that of course is the secondary objectives. Now our secondaries in Nephilim were really good, if not too good. They were too easy to score. However, you could also argue that that kept us afloat, kept us winning on the table with a codex which essentially is really old. You know, there's been a lot of codex creep with our book. So when I first saw the secondary objectives in this new book, I must admit I was a little worried about Necrons. However, now I've digested things and I've looked at the whole of the picture of what is on offer for Necrons, maybe it's not quite as bad. However, let's talk about the bad changes. Now, the first change, and arguably the biggest change, is the loss of Code of Combat. It's just not there no more. So we had 4 secondaries previously, and we only ever took Necron secondaries, or at least I did. It was just a case of, did you have the Silent King and some overlords on the table, and if you did, then you took Code of Combat. However, Code of Combat isn't there at all, and of course, unless you're playing Zerrikan Dynasty, you're not going to have the Silent King in your list either. So massive changes there. It's going to make a massive difference to how Necron lists are built going forward. The Necron Ancient Machineries in Shadow Operations hasn't changed too much. You still do an action on an objective in the same way that we did before, but we can no longer do it with core vehicles, just core units and also canoptic units, but not vehicles. It makes sense. I mean, why would a vehicle be able to do an action? Now, ideally you want to be doing these actions with objective secure units, either troops or units which have the objective secure ability. Now, previously, of course, that's why we took OBSEC and pre-game move. Not only can you do the objectives in your turn with pretty much any unit in your army, but you get that pre-game move to get onto the objectives as quick as you can. That's why it was just so powerful. Maybe that's why GW nerfed it. Ancient Machinery is competing with Raise the Banners and also Retrieve Data. Raise the Banners can only be done with infantry units, and data can only be done with infantry and bike units. So a different scenario. I think it does depend on your list build whether you take one of those two or Ancient Machineries. Now, the next Necron secondary objective to have massive changes is in the Battlefield Supremacy category, and that is Purge the Vermin. 2 big changes here. The first one, you can only do it from turn 2 onwards, so no turn 1 purge. And also, well, your opponent no longer has to be wholly within the quarter, so they could have a unit straddled between 2 quarters and stop you getting both of those points. It's a big change. Purge the Vermin potentially is still doable, but it is no way as easy. Purge the Vermin is competing with Behind Enemy Lines and Engage in All Fronts. Behind Enemy Lines has had a slight change. If you do it with a troops unit, you gain an extra CP. Now, unless you built a list specifically to get into your opponent's deployment zone, you're probably not going to be taking that. Engage is definitely a possibility. You do need to be 6 inches away from another table quarter to score it. If you have lots of maybe fast units like Tomb Blades, potentially Scarab Swarms, you could potentially go for Engage. However, I don't know that it's necessarily suited to our Necron army, and that does mean that Purge the Vermin is probably the best one out of those 3, depending on your list build, of course. Our third and last Necron secondary is in the No Mercy, No Respite category. That, of course, is Treasures of Eons, which also has a little change. You can still score it from turn 1, however you get less points now if you are on 3 objectives. So it's still 2 points for 1, 3 points for 2, but it's 4 points for 3 as opposed to 5. So just making it slightly tougher to score those points. I can understand why Games Workshop have done this. I mean, you look at a lot of tournament Necron wins, and they are winning by almost 100 points on every game, so obviously those secondaries were very easy to score. It's going to be interesting to see what impact all of these changes have on Necrons. However, we've still got more to talk about. Treasures of Eons is competing with No Prisoners and Grind Them Down in the No Mercy, No Respite category. Now, No Prisoners hasn't changed, but Grind Them Down has. You gain a CP if troops achieve it. Now both of those secondaries are more about your opponent than what you can do on the table. Can you achieve grind them down almost every turn, which is what you need to do to get a good amount of points. No prisoners, again it depends on your opponent's army. Are you going to achieve all of those wounds? I do think that Treasures of Eons is a pretty decent choice for Necrons, especially if you have a good amount of objectives in no man's land. Now we do have other categories which don't compete with the Necron secondaries, so let's have a look at those. There's Warpcraft with Abdur the Witch, however you say it, which is pretty good if you're up against an army with lots of psychers. We also have another category, Purge the Enemy, which isn't competing with Necron secondaries. We've got Bring It Down and Assassination. Bring It Down hasn't changed, and if you're up against an army with lots of vehicles and monsters, it could be useful. Assassination has changed a little. If troops achieve this, you get an extra CP, and of course this is only going to be useful if your opponent has lots of characters, but it is an option. Not having quite so auto-include Necron objectives potentially might free us up a little more with our list builds. You might see different list builds on the table, and of course building a list for secondary objectives is key to winning games, and of course you have to take into account your opponent's list as well, so all of these things have to be considered. Now at the same time as this book coming out, of course we got points reductions and some interesting things there. In particular, of course, the Warriors and the Ghost Arks both coming down in points, which maybe is trying to compensate for the fact that they got rid of Objective Secure and pre-game move. Some of the Wards of Law have also come down. The Monolith is a pretty standout one, coming down to 270 points. And now in the Arks of Omen Detachment, of course, gaining the Dynasty Code. So I think we're going to see some very nice combos going forward. Now whilst the Silent King is gone, unless you're taking Zerican Dynasty, and Code of Combat has gone, it's generally easier to list build with the new detachment, and also we've got more CPs because of the new detachment. The points changes obviously impacts things as well, but not only that, they've got rid of Armour of Contempt. Now I play against Orcs mainly, so the loss of Armour of Contempt isn't going to make much of a difference to me. However, it makes a big difference generally in the game. Those Space Marine units not taking away -1 on your guns, and that means that Warriors, who have now reduced in price, are a lot more powerful on the table. And of course, being troops with Objective Secure, maybe that is a reason for us not to necessarily take Nihilic Dynasty. Nyalic. Maybe other dynasties could work out well. Potentially the pre-game move and Rad Wreathed Custom Dynasty, Zerican Dynasty, arguably is still very playable, especially now it's the only way you can play the Silent King. I know a lot of people play dynasties because it's their favourite dynasty. Their army is painted in that dynasty, and that's great. Obviously, I'm talking about in a competitive sort of scene, what dynasties will come out on top. I do feel that Nyalic is probably going to come out on top. That's Objective Secure. It's really useful. You've got double OBSEC with troops. They have a good stratagem allowing you to shoot and do actions, again pretty useful, and they've got a fairly decent Warlord trait and relic. Now of course it depends on your list build. You can build a list for Novok, no trouble with Necrons. You can build a list for Mefret, no trouble with Necrons. You've got a lot of options. List building is definitely going to be very important in Arks of Omen, and I'm going to be making some list building videos, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss them. In the meantime, here's a video that YouTube thinks you would like to watch next.